We're staying in our design intent.dwg file, and you'll notice I've left it in the same state as it was at the end of the last video, where we basically set up the page setup, making sure that our white sheet with our dashed printer limits and our title block all tallied up nicely. So basically our border of our title block now sits nicely inside those printer limits in the Layout 1 tab. Now, what we're going to look at is creating a new layout. Instead of calling it Layout 1, we're going to make it more descriptive. What we're also going to do is add a scaled viewport so that we can start scaling our model space information so that it appears in the Layout tabs. Now, let's do the layout bit first. I'm going to right-click on Layout 1, and I'm going to rename it. And we're going to call it A3-landscape. Now, as a rule of thumb, what I tend to do is rename the layout tabs with the same name as, obviously, the page setup. Now, just make sure you spell it correctly, unlike me. So there you go, A3 Landscape, press Enter, and you can see that tab now says A3 Landscape. Now, you can remove as many layouts as you want from a drawing. We don't need Layout 2. So I can right-click on that and I can delete it. You'll get a little prompt there saying the selected layout will be permanently deleted. So I'll just OK that and it's gone. So our A3 Landscape tab has a page setup called A3 Landscape. You can check that by right-clicking Page Setup Manager like we did in the previous video. There's our A3 Landscape DWF, which is being used by the A3 Landscape tab. So we can close that again now. Now, what we need to do is create a viewport so that we can display what is in the model space in our Layout tab. So, Home tab on the ribbon, Layer Properties in the Layers panel. We're going to create another new layer and we're going to call it Viewports. And we're going to create a scaled viewport in our A3 Landscape tab. So there's our Viewports layer. Give it a different color as well. So I'll change that to something like a nice blue that stands out on the white background in the Layout tab. And what you also want to make sure of is that it doesn't plot as well. So I'm going to expand the Layer Properties Manager a little bit, like so. And what you'll notice, there's a plot here. Can you see it here? There's a plot column. And the Viewports layer, you click on the little plotter, and can you see there's a little no entry symbol? That means that when you actually physically plot or print the drawing, the Viewports layer will not plot. And you don't want viewports everywhere, especially if you've got multiple viewports plotting all over your drawing, because they're just going to be rectangles around all of the views that you've got on your drawing. So double click next to Viewports to make it the current layer, like so. And then what we'll do is we'll close the Layer Properties Manager. Now, you'll notice up at the top of the screen on the ribbon, just to add a little bit of confusion, we now have a Layout tab on the ribbon, as well as a Layout tab called A3 Landscape at the bottom of the screen. Autodesk could have possibly named those slightly differently. But if I click on the Layout tab on the ribbon now, you'll notice I can create layout viewports. So I want a rectangular layout viewport. So I click on rectangular there on the drop down, and I'm going to use my object snaps, and I'm going to click once here and drag my viewport and come down here to get this corner here as well, like so. Now you'll notice things kind of go a bit crazy on the screen. There's a grid and there's some information there. You can see our bolting plate, you can see our notes and everything else. Now basically what's happened there is when you create that particular viewport, what it's done is it's switched the grid on. Now I don't want the grid on in that viewport, so what I want to do is I want to be able to switch that grid off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here to my little customization icon. And as you can see, I've got various tools available to me here, coordinates, paper space, and so on, but I can't see grid anywhere on there. So how do I turn the grid off? Well, what I do is I'm going to close the customization there and double click inside the viewport. As soon as I do that, do you notice the status bar changes and gives me all of the model space settings? There's grid, there's object snaps and so on. I switch the grid off and suddenly everything's a lot clearer because I've activated the viewport. Now, because I've activated the viewport, you'll also notice I've got a really weird scale, 0.114232. Change that to 1:5. And you'll notice everything sizes accordingly. And you can use pan, Don't use zoom because that will change the scale, but I can pan just to centralize that a little bit on the drawing. Now you might want to take it just a little bit up to the left like so, because you've got some dimensions there, and you want to place some text and possibly also your table as well in a different viewport in a moment. So what we'll do now is we'll double click outside the viewport like so to deactivate, and you can see now how we're bringing in our model space information through the new viewport there in the A3 landscape tab.